Hello everyone, welcome back to the Card Combo Show and my review of the two-player Noctis versus Ardyn starter deck. I say review, there's not much to review, it's fantastic, it is really, really good. Well, at least the retainer side of it is really, really good. But, you know, there are some fun things you can do with the captain side of it as well, or Ardyn's side of it. But as per usual, I'm not going to be focusing on the meta stuff, although there are some arguably meta things in this thing. I'll be focusing more on some of the more fun things you can do with some of the cards. Some of the cards you can't really combo much on their own because it's very, very tribal, but that doesn't mean that there aren't still some interesting things out there. So we'll get to it. First, we'll focus on the Noctis side of it. So, without further ado, Iedolas, because this is the Noctis side of it, isn't it? We'll start with the Ardyn side of it. Right, so Iedolas is 6 CP fire backup. When Iedolas enters the field, choose one fire forward of cost 4 or less in your break zone, play it onto the field, and then you can dull, put Iedolas into the break zone, choose one forward, deal it 7,000 damage, which is a fine amount. A lot of higher power forwards these days, so 7k isn't quite enough to cut it, and it being a 6 cost backup means you're not going to be running too many of these, I imagine. Even though it can break itself, you need those applicable forwards to be in the break zone already, so one or two at most, maybe. It depends on the deck you're running, to be fair, but personally I think I'd only run 1 or 2. So Jet Bahamut isn't too bad. When he enters the field, it'll deal 5k something if it's put from the field to the break zone, then it gets removed from the game instead. But if you're at damage 3, then you can bring in Jet Bahamut, who can then also bring in either Amber Bahamut or Garnet Bahamut. I think Garnet Bahamut is the one that increases the damage that this Jet Bahamut does. So Iedolas into Jet Bahamut into Amber Bahamut to then deal 8k to a forward your opponent controls, which will then remove from the game as well, which isn't too bad. Hien's always going to kick the bucket first in a Samurai's deck, so being able to recur him quickly is nice. Now, there is obviously the Samurai backup, which you can dull put into the break zone to then replay Hien, which is nice early, but if your opponent has the means of locking down that backup or just breaking the backup, then they will. So that means when they get rid of Hien, you will have a harder time to recur it. So having the instant effect of Iedolas entering the field to then target Hien is quite nice, but this is why I say you probably only run 1 or at most 2 of Iedolas, because you don't want to run too much recursion in that regard, because it's high costed. Either way, being able to get Hien back onto the field, and then if you've got enough 14 characters, be able to gain haste and something just out of the blue like that is quite nice, because your opponent can see the Samurai backup coming as well. Iedolas might take them a bit more by surprise. Faris. So when Faris or Job Warrior Light enters the field, select one of 2 following actions, choose a forward of light, choose one forward, deal it 2,000 damage for each Job Warrior of Light you control, and during this turn, the cost required to cast your next Job Warrior of Light is reduced by 2, it cannot become 0. So being able to play Iedolas to get Faris onto the field, to reduce the cost of the next one, or again just bring out another Warrior of Light onto the field. Again, it has to be fire, so multi-element cards are a bit because you need to have those actual fire forwards in the break zone. But yeah, being able to bring something onto the field to either trigger Faris or just to be able to recur Faris, because again she's going to be a forward that dies pretty quickly. Celteus, similar sort of thing. You bring Celteus back onto the field, at which point you then need to ditch some of the fire or ice forwards from your break zone to then play something off the top of your deck, which obviously kind of counteracts how good Iedolas would be, because if you play Celteus before you actually get a chance to play Iedolas, then you're going to be getting rid of some of his targets, and if you draw him later in the game, he's now a bit more worthless. Either way, being able to Iedolas into Celteus into something else off the top of your deck might be quite good. And Noctis. So when a category 15 character other than Noctis you control is put from the field into the break zone, choose one 40 opponent controls, dull it. So this Noctis actually combos with quite a few of the cards in this set, but or this deck, sorry. But Iedolas into the break zone, you get to deal 5k to something. And then you also get to dull something else out as well. So it means that you just get to move 2 things out of the way as well. Ravus. So when Ravus enters the field, you may remove 2 job captain in your break zone from the game, and when you do so, choose one forward, do 10,000 damage at damage 3, he gains plus 1,000 power, and he's a 4k, 4 CP, 8k fire forward. Captains aren't really a thing, even though there are some captains in the game. None of them really synergize that well with each other outside of, this starter deck. But Borghen, he's a captain, so you might be able to go and remove him from the game because he's quite a cheap Borghen anyway, so he's the sort of thing you want to get into the break zone. But you play him onto the field, your opponent doesn't generally want him to break because then they have to discard a card. Either way, another way to be able to just get another captain to the break zone, because it doesn't have to be just Ravus and just Glauca. There are others in other elements as well, mostly in earth and fire, but there's Borg and Ice as well. Core, so earth, and also fits the 15 theme as well. So again, having core in the break zone, because you could probably run a fair few core in a 15 themed fire earth deck, and again, core in the break zone, remove them with Ravus, get till 10k something. General Leo, another different captain, also in fire, but what's interesting is you could be running quite a forward heavy themed deck, obviously with something like General Leo you probably would be anyway, but that would mean that you also have a higher chance of having more captains in the break zone ready for Ravus to deal 10k something. And if you are running a higher forward count deck and not running as many summons, then you're going to need something to have a lot of entry, or you need your forwards to have lots of entry abilities or means of getting rid of your opponent's forwards, because they're also doubling up as your summons as well, and using something like General Leo to neither can play summons, and then you can start aggressing your opponent with by 10k'ing their forwards is always a nice start. Alright, next up we have Aranea, a 6 CP EX 9k lightning forward with haste and first strike, and then the EX is when Aranea enters the field, choose one forward across 3 or less your opponent controls, break it, and damage 5. When Aranea enters the field, choose one forward across 5 or less your opponent controls, break it. So potentially there, she can break 2 things on entry, which is really nice. And the EX of break something of 3 or less is always decent as well. Lots of forwards get played at 3 or 2. Most of them annoying, so having that as an EX. But then also just a 9k haste first strike, really good. Kayn, make her become a 9k first striker with haste. This Kayn doesn't get much play in Dragoons, but I personally have always liked, it's been my preference of Kayn, just because a static 2k buff across the board, which means your opponent has to get rid of Kayn before they can get rid of something else, if they're wanting to kill something with power. Or damage even. Yeah, just having that Kayn making Aranea this huge forward of 11k first strike is quite the problem for them. One thing to be of note with Aranea actually as well is the fact that if your opponent still has something like Auryn on the field, then that does immediately make Aranea worse, because Aranea can target Auryn with both of her entry abilities, which means she has to target him with both of her entry abilities. So yeah, you want to make sure you get rid of something like Auryn first. Star Sybil. So being able to play Aranea onto the field for just a break of Star Sybil is quite nice, and she has some decent entry abilities. She's also got haste as well, and both EXs, which is nice. Earth Lightning doesn't get played a huge amount, but something I did use to get played with Earth in Lightning is Rampant. And Rampant may see some more players. There's some decent 11 cards out recently. And Aranea, I think, is, depending on the type of deck you're going for, she's actually not too bad just as a standard card on her own. To be able to break potentially 2 things on entry with haste and first strike for 6 CP, I quite like that, if I'm perfectly honest. Renoa. Aranea comes in, breaks 2 things. You play Renoa, she then gets to break maybe a further 2 things. Simple as that, really. Sid Sapphire. So you can pay an Earth and Dull, choose one forward and one other forward. Until the end of the turn, the former loses haste and first strike and brave, and the latter gains all the abilities lost by the previous effect until the end of the turn. You can use that on your own forwards, so that your forward loses the effect, and another of your forwards gains the effect. So you can use, or maybe play Aranea, attack with Aranea, and then you can then use Sid Sapphire to take her ability, Arenea's abilities away, and give it to another forward as well. And you can also use it on your opponent's turn as well, so they may attack with something. You can then Sid Sapphire your Aranea and another forward, which can block now with first strike. Not too shabby. Glauca. So a 3 CP 7k lightning forward. When Glauca is put from the field into the break zone, you may search for 2 job captain with different names and add them to your hand. Dull. Put Glauca into the break zone, choose up to 2 forwards, dull them. So yeah, again, captains don't really have a huge amount of synergy outside of Glauca and Ravus in this set. But that's not to say that there aren't some decent ones, and Glauca dying and getting you 2 cards is nice. If your opponent has a means of emptying a break zone or stopping Glauca from going to the break zone by removing from the game instead, that does kind of suck, but it means at least that it's probably cost them more than it has for you. Now, you can obviously gauge this when you're playing your opponent. If they're playing something like Fire Lightning, then there's a chance that they will be able to remove Glauca rather than kill him. But getting 2 cards back to hand for this 1 forward dying ain't too shabby. Noctis, so you can dull and put Glauca into the break zone, choose up 2 forwards, dull them, and then using Noctis's previously mentioned effect, a 15 characters put from the field to the break zone, you get to dull something else out. So dulling 3 forwards by putting Glauca into the break zone isn't too bad, at which point Glauca then gets you 2 more cards to hand. Not too shabby. Magic pot! So yeah, put Glauca into the break zone. You then get 2 cards to hand, and then you get to search and play another Glauca onto the field as well. And there is the other Glauca, which reduces the cost of your lightning forwards. So you might play into that one to then play something else onto the field for cheaper. So if Glauca goes and searches you another lightning captain, for example, you can then potentially play it onto the field for a little bit cheaper as well. General Leo. This is a push, I will admit. So he has the Shock S ability, which is an S and 3, deal 5k damage to all the forwards opponent controls. When Glauca dies, you can go and search another General Leo and any other captain to your hand, and then potentially use that for General Leo's S ability. If you've got Iedolas on the field, you can pay for that to potentially deal 10k to your opponent's board. It requires you to have, Glauca, General Leo, and Iedolas on the field, which is probably not an incredible situation to be in, just because General Leo isn't that great, to be honest, and your opponent's probably going to kill Iedolas before Glauca dies. But still, it's a potential means. You've got to use Glauca's ability to kill himself. You go search yourself some more captains to then fund General Leo's ability. I mean, if you pay Iedolas and General Leo, that's a total of 5 CP, of which 2 have to be fire, and then the S for General Leo as well. Yeah, it's something. Alright, now Ardyn. I love this card. So he's a 4 CP Lightning Fire 9k forward with Brave, and when a forward is put from the field into the break zone during this turn, the cost required to cast your next forward is reduced by 5. It cannot become 0. This effect will only trigger once per turn, and then you got Royal Retribution, which is S, Fire, Lightning, Dull. Choose one forward, loses all its abilities until the end of the turn, break it. So not too dissimilar from don't you love it when your brain just takes all information and just goes somewhere else? Walker and his Reels ability, whatever. Yeah, so similar to that. Ject. You put Ject into the break zone, search for one light or dark character, add it to your hand. So that means you put something into the break zone. That one will trigger Ardyn's effect to make it so that the next forward you cast is reduced by 5. And there are a lot of decent dark and light forwards that you could pull with Ject. So Chaos, for example. This is quite a funny one. The cost required to cast Chaos is reduced by 2 for each element among the characters your opponent controls. So even if they're just in a mono element deck, he's reduced by 2. And now with Ardyn's effect, he's now reduced by 5 as well. So a total of 7 reduced. So he's now only a 4 CP forward for 8k, which is on curve. But then your opponent also selects a forward other than light and dark light control, and you gain control of it. So for 4 CP, that isn't too bad. And then if they are in a dual color deck, so they got 2, let's say a fire and an earth backup, Chaos now only costs you 2. Again, for an 8k forward that also steals on your opponent's forwards, not too shabby. Sin, the obvious choice here, Ject into Sin, but ultimately being able to play Sin onto the field for only 4 CP, because his cost has been reduced by 5 with Ardyn. You do break all the forwards, but that includes Ardyn obviously, but it's a cheap board clear, which you've searched using Ject as well, so not the worst in my opinion. Minerva. Play Minerva for only 2 CP. I love that. Minerva doesn't get much play, but I think that's mostly just due to the fact of her high cost, right? At the beginning of each of your main... sorry, I can't speak. At the beginning of your main phase 1, select one of the 3 following. All forwards you control gain plus 3,000 power, all characters opponent controls lose their abilities and then turn, or draw a card. If Minerva were only a 2 CP 10k forward, she might get a bit more play. So yeah, maybe just running one Minerva alongside this Ject and Ardyn to be able to go and search Minerva, play onto the field for 2. That's quite funny in my opinion. I really like Minerva anyway, so just trying to find more ways to play her. Shinryu, another problematic forward. Now he is very specific on the forwards he'll deal damage to upon entry, so 3, 6, and 9, but it's only your opponent controls, which is nice. Deals 10k damage to all of them, but at the beginning of the main phase 1, you either get to draw 2 cards or your opponent's forwards lose 7,000 power until the end of the turn. That's pretty significant, a bit more reliable. Probably, I'm not going to say more reliable than Minerva, but at least it's going to be probably attacking your opponent's board quite a bit, or just giving you loads more to hand. And obviously it can't become 0, so you have to pay the 1, but still a 1k, a 1 CP 9k forward that does either of those 2 effects, and also not to mention the entry effect is pretty decent. And then we've got other things as well which tie in nicely with Ardyn. So Black Waltz 3, for example, Black Waltz 3 gets put from the field into the break zone, trigger Ardyn's effect, and Black Waltz 3 will get you 2 black mages from your break zone. You can now play them onto the field for a lot less than what you should do. Obviously you can play Vivi to then get yourself a Black Waltz 3 back, and you'll only have paid 1 CP for Vivi because it's reduced by 5 but can't become 0. So yeah, not bad. Tread, put Tread into the break zone. Now the next thing you cast will be -5, and Tread has a decent ability as well. So was it choose one forward and turn against plus 50,000 power on first strike? Yeah, not bad. Alright, Ignis, now actually onto the Noctis side of things. So he's a 4 CP 8k wind forward. The card name Noctis, Gladio, and Prompto you control gain this character cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities. Not too bad. And then when Ignis or a card named Noctis you control attacks, activate all the characters you control. That is bonkers. The fact that not only Ignis and Noctis get this ability, but that it's also all your characters is just phenomenal. It's just such a good ability. And yeah, I mean, this is where probably some of the more meta stuff might come in. So yeah, being able to protect this little Noctis is quite nice. Not to mention the fact that it's when any Noctis attacks. So this Noctis attacks with a party attack, you can then reactivate your backups and do some other stuff. Reactivate your forwards and do some other stuff. There's just so much good stuff you can do with this man, and it's just disgusting. Fiona, so let's say just Ignis attacks. You've got all your backups still open, use Fiona, go search yourself the character you want, reactivate all your characters. Again, it's not just all your backups, it's your characters as well. And then it's Ignis and Noctis attacks, so it means you can potentially search with Fiona 3 times if you really wanted to, because she doesn't, or Fiona doesn't have the stipulation of only once per turn. So search one character, add it to your hand. Nice. Chalinka, so making it so that you can attack with a total of 3 times with Ignis and Noctis, one of them attacking twice. Yeah, reactivate all characters. 3 times. Bismarck, obviously reactivate your characters, so you attack with Ignis, reactivate everything on the stack, dull all your wind forwards, deal pings of damage to all your opponent's forwards, reactivate them, dull them again to then do even more damage. You then attack with Noctis, reactivate everything, and just keep on ping damage at things, and it is just wow. Lila said, obviously with reactivation, I'm gonna include dancers. I just love dancers. Yes, you can dull 1 drop dancer, or card name dancer, sorry. Choose a forward, dull it, so you can just dull your backups, or maybe dull a couple of forwards, to just move all your opponent's forwards out of the way, and just to keep on attacking through with all your forwards. Or you could potentially use Lilith's ability to dull a total of 4 dancers to then deal AK. Just be mindful of the fact that it also deals damage to your own forwards as well. And obviously when you're attacking with Ignis or Noctis, you're going to be dealing AK damage. Well, you're reactivating all your characters, which includes your forwards, which means that you could be potentially dealing AK to those forwards as well. So just bear that in mind. But either way, I like it. Adelard. Yeah, Fire Wind, you attack with all your forwards, you attack with Ignis or Noctis, reactivate your backups on the stack, pay 2 fire backups to reactivate the Adelard's effect, get that a couple of times. In Wind, you could be running something like a Dancer or Pinello to deal 1k to the board, but Adelard, that becomes 2k, again, becomes 4k, do it a 3rd time, that then becomes a total of 8k to your opponent's board. It's not too shabby. And yeah, you could, let's say you've got just 2 fire backups, Ignis, Noctis, and Adelard on the field, and then the Pinello backup ready to deal 1k damage to the board. You party attack with Ignis and Noctis, you pay the 2 fire on the stack, you can now just keep on paying that 2 fire to get Adelard to 3 times with his effect. And then use, well, you don't even have to do that, to be fair. You don't even have to party attack, because you could just pay once for Adelard, attack with Ignis, react, and then dull. We'll pay the 2 for Adelard, and then also dull the Pinello, or you dull Pinello first, so her damage goes on stack first, and then Adelard's effect would then resolve, and then yeah, brain fart moment. But either way, I quite like this, and I've been a big fan of Firewind for a while now, so this could be something quite juicy. Ravana. Yep, he doesn't, well, he can reactivate whenever something dies, but he can also attack 4 times, so you attack with Ravana, they don't block, you then attack with Ignis, you reactivate Ravana, Ravana can then attack again, you attack with Noctis, you then reactivate Ravana, attack with Ravana again. Yeah, that's a lot of attacks. Right, next we have Prompto. Not much you can do with this card, so if you control a card named Noctis, Prompto gains plus 2,000 power and haste, so run the backup Noctis, I guess. He becomes a standard 8k haste forward, which is okay. And when Prompto attacks, if you control card name Ignis and card name Gladio, draw 2 cards. Now the Gladio, or both Gladios, will have their cost reduced by this Noctis as well, so that's quite nice. And the old school Ignis can search this Noctis, I believe, so you could always use that to search this, so you can still kind of run the retainer package to a weird degree, and have Prompto drawing you lots of cards, being quite big, and damage free. When Prompto enters the field, you may search one card named Noctis, Ignis, or Gladio and add to your hand as well. So yeah, that's something to consider. I'm just skipping through things. Gladio, so at 5 CP, 9k Earth forward. If you control card name Noctis, cost required is reduced by 3. If Gladio deals damage to forward, the damage increases by 2, and then damage 3, Gladio gains +1000 power and Brave. So, Wall, being able to play your 5k, I keep saying 5k when I mean 5 CP. When playing playing your 5 CP forwards for cheap already is quite nice, and Wall falls into the right element exchange, and then be able to play Wall for even cheaper as well, or having Wall already on the field and playing something like Gladio and then also drawing you a card because Gladio is entering the field. Just quite nice. Getting all these things on the field for cheap that are big and troublesome, and yeah, drawing you cards at the same time. Sophie, so when you cast a character of 5 or more, choose one forward dependent controls, deal it damage equal to Sophie's power. This effect will trigger only once per turn, and then if Sophie deals damage to 4 due to an ability, double the damage instead. So playing Gladio onto the field for only 3, you then get to trigger Sophie's effect, but then you're also doubling the damage as well, so she's then dealing 10k something, which if you already have Noctis on the field, the starter deck Noctis, that will trigger for Gladio, but then also trigger for Sophie as well, so you'll actually be dealing 10k or 11k from Gladio to 2 different forwards as well, so that's quite nice. Just something of note, if you play Sophie onto the field when you have Noctis, the Noctis from the start set, then it won't, Sophie's damage won't double. I can't remember exactly why. There is a Twitter thread about it. I'll put it in the YouTube description below, but yeah, it's just a bit weird. Either way, Gladio, Sophie, not too bad. Noctis, as I mentioned before, having the Noctis back up then make Gladio just basically permanently a little bit cheaper unless your opponent can break this Noctis. Titan, really weird summon, 3 CP Earth summon. If you cast Titan, you remove one forward and you break them from the game as an extra cost. Choose one forward, deal damage equal to the power of the forward removed by the extra cost. Just kind of strange because there's no reliability there. You may have no forwards in your break zone if you're having a really bad game, or if your opponent hasn't broken any forwards. And yeah, it's just, you might have forwards in there that just aren't high enough power, so you have to play this summon only or exclusively with lots of high power forwards. Thankfully, Earth has lots of those. So Boonavels, it's a 10k forward, can potentially come a little bit cheaper as well, depending on what your opponent's running. Oh no, sorry, it's you control, sorry. So yeah, you could potentially be running Earth, Wind, and then Boonavels only costs you 6, which is pretty good for a 10k forward that can break stuff on entry or gains Brave and can attack twice. Not entry, sorry, break stuff on attack. But yeah, then when it does inevitably die, you then cast Titan to then deal 10k something, which for a 3 CP summon isn't too shabby. Borgen, it's a 1 CP captain, and he's 9k, so I mean, when he does die, unfortunately, your opponent selects one forward and their breaks and they add it to their hand, but then you can cast Titan when they do eventually play that forward and hopefully deal it 9k with removing Borgen from the game. Montleonis, again, another cheap 9k forward that just kind of works in Earth regardless. And then X-Death, because you're removing stuff from the game with Titan, and X-Death likes things to be removed. And finally, we have Noctis, who is a 4 CP Wind Earth 7k forward. So when Noctis enters the field, you may search one job retainer and add it to your hand. When a Wind or Earth forward other than Noctis enters your field, choose one forward opponent controls. The forward that entered the field deals damage equal to its power to the chosen forward. This effect will only trigger once per turn. So it's like combat damage. So the forward enters and it sees its power and does that to the forward. Yeah. Scarmelian, this is kind of funny. So this can happen on your opponent's turn as well. So maybe your opponent attacks, you obviously don't want to block with Noctis, you play Scarmelian onto the field. When Scarmelian enters the field, choose one forward during this turn. If it is dealt damage, double the damage instead. So you can stack it so that Scarmelian's effect will resolve first before Noctis's, at which point when Noctis' ability resolves, Skarmelian will then deal 6k to that forward rather than just 3k. And then the fact that Skarmelian is a first striker means that it can block, and then it will also block again for 6k. So you're playing a 2 CP backup that is going to be blocking for a total of 12. Not too shabby. Lich. Yeah, I finally found a way to make this card at least a bit decent. So when you receive a 5th point of damage, you may pay 1 Earth. When you do so, play Lich onto the field, dull. This effect will trigger only if Lich is in the break zone. So maybe you take your opponent's going to try and run you down, then to your 5th point of damage, you pay the 1 Earth, play Lich onto the field. When Lich deals damage to a forward or is dealt damage by a forward, break that forward. Noctis is... when a wind or earth forward opponent controls, other than Noctis enters your field, choose on forward opponent controls. The forward that entered the field deals damage equal to its power to the chosen forward. So Lich is dealing damage to that forward. When Lich deals damage to a forward, it breaks. So Lich will then immediately kill something, which might be quite a nice blind side for your opponent, or not for your opponent, against your opponent, because these cards don't get played very often. So having just one off in your break zone, hopefully, to then play onto the field with 1 Earth, break something, stop your opponent from taking you to death, hopefully. Yeah, I just really like it. Typhon, so being able to pay 0 to just constantly keep on returning Typhon to your hand, keep on replaying it onto the field, removing 2 things from your opponent's break zone, but also then dealing 8k to your opponent's forwards as well. Borgen, it's a 1 CP, 9k, paying 1 CP to deal 9k something and I have a forward there. That's alright. Vanille. So when Vanille is put from the field into the break zone, search one card named Hecaton and remove it from the game. If you do so, return Vanille onto the field dull. So you can block with her, she dies, remove her Hecaton, play her back onto the field, deal 7k to something. And Barbarisha. Play Barbarisha onto the field, stack it so that Barbarisha will set a forward to 1k damage, and then Noctis is effect as well. So Barbarisha then deals 7k something, or 7k to that forward that you set to 1k. You get to break it. Potentially you can work it with something else as well, so maybe again the Pinello or Dancer backup to deal 1k to your opponent's board. You set 1 forward to 1k, so it's going to pop, and then Barbarisha will deal 7k, so maybe an 8k forward, which is also taken 1k from the Dancer, so then that will pop as well. So a potential way to kill 2 forwards as well. And there we go, there's my interesting take on the 2-player start set. Yeah, like I said before, this set is just really, really good. It runs smooth as butter on its own. Well, again, I'm talking about the retainer side of things. I actually haven't seen that much of the other side played, but those are the cards I want to try more of, just because they're less meta, I guess. But I think that, you know, as time goes on, there might be some decent captains or more captains coming out. They can do some interesting things. Hopefully in the Opus 18, I actually can't remember if there are any captains been revealed, but hopefully there'll be a couple more captains in this set as well, so we can synergize with those cards a bit more. But I really like Ardyn as an effect. Be able to reduce the cost of your next forward by 7 is really, really good. So it could be a case of you're in, I don't know, ice, and something allows you to play the 7 CP Sephi onto the field for only 2 CP. Obviously Ardyn is Fire Lightning, so you'd need to find a way of playing one there. You could play something like Alcid to get him onto the field, and then, you know, you're in Lightning Ice, so you've got loads of other disgusting cards at a really high CP as well. And just being able to play them for cheaper ain't too bad. And the fact that Ardyn's effect is a static effect as well is quite nice. Water also has some really good abilities just to nuke some of your own forwards. Obviously got the optical fan for it, but then, you know, you've got your Vikings, which when they die they draw you cards, which is nice, and then also triggering Ardyn's effect to then again play something on the field. But again, you're not in the right element for Ardyn, so you need to make sure that somehow you're working him in there. Either way, I think this start set is just really, really good. A fantastic starting place for any newbies if you haven't picked this up yet, at which point you really should. Ironically, I haven't, but I've played against it a fair amount, and yeah, I really like it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next video.